Hey, Mike.
Hey, Caroline.
Who are we talking to today?
We're talking to Damon Krukowski, indie rock legend of Damon and Naomi, of the Ways of Hearing podcast, and of Galaxie 500 fame.
Awesome.
Yeah, let's get to it. Damon, I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you value your work when you're working on something new. How do you measure the success of it? Because you just released a beautiful new album, and you've been making albums for a long time. But how do you measure the success of something new these days?
Wow, what a great question. Thank you. Thanks for listening to the record. I don't know. I don't know how we do anymore. It's a big question. I mean, especially during COVID, this has been really weird for me and Naomi because, I mean, for everybody, I think has gone through various versions of this. You sort of, usually, it's really going out and meeting people on the road and performing where you get that kind of sense of some kind of reflection back of what you've been doing and how it sits with people. And, you know, you get to sing the songs in person and sort of look into people's eyes and see what connects and what doesn't, or how it's different than you thought. And we haven't had that, obviously. So we've just been home, and it's been really, really strange. So it's been actually, you know, come to think of it, I hadn't put this together in my head before, but it's been more like when I've released a book that I've written, where there's this weird, like, one-way thing that can happen. First time I published a book, I got really depressed afterwards because it was just like this, so much buildup, you know, for me. And then it just like went out. And this is a book of prose poems, and not nonfiction. And really, I just went out in the world. It was like, well, you know, how do I know if anybody ever read this? You know, it's so weird. Like, books are so silent.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was thinking, oh, it's not like music. Like, music has this amazing satisfaction when you go out and you perform and you get that moment back. But this time we didn't. So, you know, it is a little bit depressing in that way of like it was when I published a book of poems. Like, oh man.
That's interesting. I mean, because there's a beautiful moment on your podcast, Ways of Hearing, where you talk about where you and Naomi are going to the former Yugoslavia, and you talk about how your music reached this land before you even arrived there. And with COVID, your music is reaching all these people, but you're not arriving anywhere.
Yeah, that's so well put. That's exactly it. Because until we got there, who would think, you know, and I'm not the type of person that's like, yeah, I know my music's got to be hot in Belgrade.
Yeah.
You know, we're not those kind of people. We just assume no one listens. And we're always surprised when people do. Like, I was surprised you even mentioned the record. So we're always surprised happily when people have heard it or received it. So yeah, it did take us physically going really far that time. And I mean, we love traveling. So that's been another weird thing about the last 2 years. And part of it has always been this amazing, you do make connections and you discover connections that you've made long distance through your work. I mean, that's the real gift of music and of recording, the real magic of it. And of digital. I mean, that's in that Ways of Hearing. I think I was kind of making the case that, you know, digital's not all bad, you know, because I can get that reputation sometimes. Like, people assume that's what I'm saying. And it's not at all. Like, it's a miracle when you can go somewhere. And in that case, there were no record stores. It was, I mean, I've been thinking about Yugoslavia today because of what's going on in Ukraine. And when we were there, it was just shortly after the conflicts there had ended. And so, you know, there was really very little in the street, and there were no record stores. I mean, the idea of like our record having gotten there was absurd, but digitally it got there because digitally, you know, everything can get most anywhere. We went to China, which was a real amazing experience. And there, the internet is so severely controlled that it was a moment where we thought, oh, maybe our music didn't get here at all because of that. And then we tapped into a little scene of sort of hipsters who have all these ways around the controls. You know, they use VPNs, which are illegal there. You can actually like be arrested for using a VPN.
Yeah.
But they had access, and they were fully versed in all the latest Pitchfork releases, you know.
Wow.
But I mean, it took a lot for them to do that.
That's cool.
You know, it took like a friend would go to Hong Kong and come back with a program that let them, you know, break out of the Chinese wall and all that stuff. Really complicated. So anyway, just more stories about, you know, music does travel, and that's a gift. But yeah, it's been very strange this time, and we don't know how to evaluate our work ever, kind of. I mean, sales have never really cut it for us, in that, you know, the times we have had sales, it didn't feel particularly connected to our own feeling of satisfaction or success. And then other times we've had great, like, yeah, this time really worked, you know, and it's just like total flop. So it goes both ways, where the sales just don't quite reflect your feelings one way or the other. So we don't really use that. And then reviews can be very satisfying, I find, when they're well written and from the heart. So that can mean a lot, actually, because you feel someone really connecting to it. But just in terms of column inches or where it appears, that doesn't do it either, because
Sure.
it can be. So yeah, it's a weird thing. But the best thing is meeting people. It really is. So yeah, we're kind of lonely here right now. How's Nashville? Are people coming through town again to perform?
It's starting up for sure.
Mhm.
You know, there are a lot of shows that get canceled last minute,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's easing back into full-fledged hotspot again. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, that's good to
you'd be
hear.
hard pressed to even think that a pandemic even happened here sometimes. If you go
Really?
downtown. Yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
I'm sure you've seen all the horrible pictures of like Kid Rock's honky tonk where
Oh God.
he's packing like 800 people and
Seriously, on
yeah,
Broadway?
on
Does he have
Broadway.
one? Oh
Yeah,
man.
he's everybody has one.
Yeah, and that's an interesting observation on like the music industry at this point. All of the, I mean, Broadway is basically lined with bars and venues owned by country music stars.
Mhm.
So it's just, and then their music kind of starts to reflect their need to sell beer and liquor
Right.
in their venue. So all these songs about tequila shots or whiskey drinks or whatever, you know, and you get people singing them in there, and then you get people lined up at the bar, and it's sort of a
Yeah.
machine at that point.
Yeah, the music
Yeah.
is just another way to make money. It's just
Mhm.
another way to sell what they're trying to sell, which is beer.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, there's
Well,
the
you know,
joke about that.
we have Naomi and I have actually been told by venue owners that our fans don't drink enough. Like, we have been flat out reproached for it, you know. And it never occurred to me that we just change the songs we write, but
Yeah.
that could be. I've mentioned whiskey in a song, you know.
Yeah.
Come on, that costs more than a beer usually at a bar.
I would love to hear like a beautiful, slow, elegiac ode to Jim Beam or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
There's a market for that.
Yeah, half our songs are tears in your beer kind of song,
Yeah.
but
More
yeah, our
sad
fans,
hits.
exactly.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, our fans don't fit the profile of you know, they don't drink enough
Right.
to satisfy. Our fans are probably like nursing the one drink, you know,
Yeah.
all evening. So
What are they, emotionally healthy or something?
yes, exactly.
But you know what's weird though too about where we are with and it doesn't really matter the size of your band, but every band is kind of asked to start their own little like bodega online
Mm,
where it's like they're selling mugs and scarves and
yeah,
t-shirts, and it doesn't matter how cool the designs are, but it starts to
Mhm.
feel like everyone needs to have their own little like mini Walmart, you know, in their
Yeah.
garage. It's weird, right?
yeah, it is crazy. I mean, it's something. Naomi does the merch for us, and we have a long-standing division about that because I was anti-T-shirt, which is really not a smart attitude to strike
Right.
if you're in a rock band. But I came across that. I mean, I was anti-T-shirt all the way back in Galaxie 500 days, which was
Mm.
absurd. But I used to get really down about it because we'd finish a gig and we'd be counting up the money, and it was all about the T-shirt sales. And I remember saying to the band, like, we're not doing this to sell T-shirts.
Mm.
But of course, that is how you get paid. And Naomi was always really into the T-shirts because she's a designer and she loves
Yes.
making nice objects. And she designed like our very first one, which we still sell actually. And then she like asked people she liked designs from to do ones for us. And so they were always special. And she always took a great deal of pleasure in it, which is one thing. But I was still like, I just can't believe like it's all about the t-shirt sales. So then when we were on our own after Galaxie 500, I was like, okay, we're on our own, no more t-shirts, right? And Naomi was like, no, we're making t-shirts.
That's funny.
Yeah, so she runs that entirely on her own because I'm like no help. Because she'll say like, well, do you want this or this? And I'm like, you know me, I want neither.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, why am I even asking you? Just forget it. Would you go to the post office? I'm like, yeah, I'll go to the post office.
I was listening to this interview with Mark Lanigan like 2 nights ago when he died.
Yeah.
And I'm not very familiar with his work. I just wanted to hear him talk. And he was talking about, this was 2 years ago. He was talking about, he never sold a lot of records anyway, but he started selling records when he sat down at the merch table, like in the last like 4 or 5 years. He started selling merch and was able to make money for the first time. And you would think that a person that came through like the whole 90s where there was money everywhere in the record industry would be a millionaire. But he's still like learning like the way that our local bands are learning in the Nashville scene.
Yeah,
that you have to have merch and interact with people.
And actually be at the table. That's pretty amazing. I wonder if he just never did it himself. He always had people doing it.
Yeah,
and I mean, he certainly did. He must have seen money of sizable amounts at various moments in his life. Yeah. But of course, there are lots of ways to spend or lose it or get rid of it too.
That's true.
and but it is, being actually at the merch table. Again, this is a thing Naomi and I have this division of because I've always been anti-t-shirt and she's really friendly and we'll go to the merch table and always like talk to people and everything. But then I learned that was really important, and it turned out to be really important to me too, to get back to your original question, which was, it is a moment where you really get to meet people and they get to say something back to you. So it's not this one-way thing of like, I got on stage, I came to town, I said everything I wanted to say on mic, and then I go backstage and I disappear and go to the next town and say everything on mic again. And, the merch table is a moment when people, it's their time to talk to you. And we've had amazing exchanges at the merch table. And so I learned that even though I hate selling t-shirts, I do like hanging out at the merch table. So we make it a point. I have a good story about that, which is we were on tour one time in Spain, just the two of us. And Naomi got horribly sick from eating a tortilla de español. You know what that is? It's like an egg.
I don't know.
A tortilla de español is like an omelet. A frittata, if you ever had a frittata. Oh, yeah. It's like an egg omelet, usually filled with potato. And it's like bar snack on every single bar in Spain. And they sit out, of course, you don't refrigerate things so much in Europe. And she ate a piece of tortilla español like at a truck stop on our way to the next gig. And by the time we got to the gig, she was so violently ill, like it terrified me actually. And but she's a trooper and she did the show. End of the show, she can't quite finish the last song, disappears off stage. She'd be just like so sick. And I go running after to find her, like, are you okay? Are you okay? She's in the toilets and she's turning around saying to me, sell the merch. Because the show was over. It was like, someone's got to be out there. Yeah. And she usually does that. And our division when we're alone is I pack up all the equipment so she can run out and sell the merch because someone's got to be in those two places. Yeah. And I hate selling the merch. So usually she goes straight out and I'm on stage packing up and like chatting with the sound people. And instead she was in the toilets and she was, sell the merch. So I had to go out and sell the merch, worried that Naomi was like blacking out. I kept being like, I'll be right back, go running back in.
That's amazing.
You alive? Yeah. Anyway, it is crucial. It is crucial. But those moments are really important. And it's something I've thought a lot about just in terms of digital and online life of musician, that there are these aspects that you can't reproduce or that we have trouble really figuring out how to. And the merch table's one. I mean, I've often thought about this and discussed it with Naomi too. It's like how do you recreate that online?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of thing where you really, I mean, there's social media and it has aspects of it, but it also is wildly different because it's not one-to-one. And it's very hard to recreate the kind of informal, accidental interactions that happen in analog, space and time. And online, I mean, this is the thing I think that digital just is really bad at. So in terms of like touring, there was all this, people tried all these online versions of shows. Oh, this is one reason why we had this long conversation about how do we recreate the merch table. Naomi and I did a digital show during lockdown. We did one performance. This local museum asked us if we would perform in a space that they owned and film it and then put it online. And we said yes. And it was like our one opportunity to play our new songs kind of for people during this lockdown. And they hired a film crew and everything. So it was like good opportunity for us with resources. And we were like racking our brains, like, how do we recreate the merch table? Because it's like, okay, we can do the show, right? But how do we do the merch table? And we had all these ideas. At one point, we had the idea we were actually going to have a merch table, and like the camera would come over to the like trying all these things to like not to sell stuff, but to recreate the kinds of encounters that happen there.
Mm.
And we talked to the curator there about it. And finally, we came up with this idea that he would interview us off camera, but totally informally, like without a set of questions, and that there'd be filming, and that we would keep it very unrehearsed and more or less spontaneous as much as we could manage. And then we'd weave that into the show. So we did that. And but the reason we did it was precisely that. It was like, the question was, the theoretical question was, how do we have a virtual merch table engagement with people? I don't know if it worked, but that was the idea. Yeah.
People want that connection with the artist, that moment to speak to them.
Absolutely. And frankly, and really, we need it too. We really need it. I mean, some people don't, like, it's interesting to hear about Mark Lanigan. Like, maybe he never wanted that, or maybe he had an issue with it. And then he came to it later, which I can understand. But it's very rewarding. It's highly, highly rewarding to hear from people,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's something that, I don't know if you tweeted this, but it's hard to curate your digital collection. I think that was you, right? Maybe a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I often think about that too.
Because that's the thing that a site like Bandcamp lacks. Mm-hmm. It's like, when you come over my house, I get to show you my cool records and my books and all the stuff that I've, think that represents me. But it's hard to like invite someone to do that online. You're just scrolling through little like tiny pictures of album covers and things like that, and none of it really makes sense. And so the record becomes the value of the record becomes a little bit diminished, even if it is the same content. You know what I mean? It's like
totally.
It's weird.
It is really weird, and there's certainly, I found it strange sometimes when I visit younger friends' houses and they don't have books and records that I can look at, because of my generation anyway, we definitely use that as a shorthand by way of introduction. I mean, it's just totally
like who's cool and who's not cool.
Yeah, there's that, and then it's also like. And it's conversation starters, and it's also this just sort of explanation of like what you value.
Yes, right, exactly. Like there's
in the world, like what's in your house.
There's that great John Waters quote. If he doesn't have books in his house, don't fuck him.
Oh yes, exactly. Yeah, John Waters is amazing that way. Did you see that? Yeah, that might even be. I read that quote too. But he wrote a whole book about his favorite writers. Did you ever see that?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's really good. He's really great at talking about other artists.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
And he's a real fan.
Yes, he is.
And then it's interesting how, of course, he's the object of people's obsessive fandom.
Yeah.
And that makes sense, because it's like a two-way get back to the merch table, it really is two-way. Although some stars, of course, don't treat it that way, but it really, anyway, it can be. And I think it is actually in practice for a lot of people. I mean, our scene that we came up in the mid to late 80s was very that way, because there was a kind of aesthetic at the time. It was cool not to be dressed for the show, like as a performer.
Yeah.
It was cool, it was cool not to have makeup on. It was like there was a whole dress down thing, but it wasn't just dress down. It was also, you should look just like you're in the audience. Like you just get up on stage and play, and then you get back in the audience and you're part of the crowd. It was very punk that way. I mean, even if you did dress, like the punks, of course, dressed to the nines, but the audience and the performers were dressed the same way. There was a mirroring all the time. And in our scene, it was like very kind of like Thrift Story and dressed down.
It's still that way.
I guess that has stuck a bit. Yeah. But on the other hand, I see performers are much less shy now about, making a show and being on stage and like having their outfit like change. Like there was a whole thing of don't change between soundcheck and the performance. Like that wasn't cool.
Right.
It was like whatever you showed up in at soundcheck, it's like you stick with that.
Yeah.
And then there was a moment where people sort of started changing a little in the dressing room and getting a little bit more like I'm on stage now, which makes sense. But now, some artists really go wild, and that can be very. I don't think that's considered uncool by a lot of people. But anyway, but the ethic was, aside from fashions, I think the ethic was the audience and the performers are the same. I mean, that was always the scene we came up in. Like Beat Happening was a great example. Are you guys into Beat Happening?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, so they were a great example of that. And then they even switched instruments on stage, this kind of informality of like, well, it could be anybody. And then literally like when your turn was done on stage, you'd get off and watch the other band from the floor. It was very much like that's what we're all doing. And that has stuck, I think, with me and Naomi, that it's always been, we haven't been so comfortable being like you walk out from the Wings and it's this whole, and then you disappear back in the Wings kind of thing. But in the 90s, that did happen a lot because, of course, bands got big and you can't do that at a certain point for all kinds of reasons. If you get really big, you can't just step up from the stage, or when you get off a stage, it's too complicated. There was this whole sort of remove that happened.
Yeah.
And I feel like that has stuck in a lot of the music industry ever since, even though times have changed so drastically. But like festivals, for example, it's rare, I think, that backstage and the front of house mingle at festivals because the entrances are totally different and security is so extreme. And sometimes there can be actually no way from one side to the other.
Right.
And that that always grates with me. I always find that really I still don't feel that's cool. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something
agreed.
about it. Yeah. But I can imagine Mark Lanigan, when things were huge for him at various moments, he would be backstage, we've toured with bands who are like that and they just want to be backstage. Like there's a world that's built backstage that is comfortable for them and protecting them and they're cocooned in. And then if things are involved like drugs and stuff, then that's all happening in this little bubble. And they don't want to venture out, and that's always been depressing to us. I mean, we've been on tours where it's harder to venture out because we were opening for a bigger band. And then it's just like, oh my God, this is so boring, just so, because the backstage is always the same.
Yeah.
It's always the same. And that's actually the goal of that whole world, which is that your workspace has been a way you wanted it to be designed. Same things on the rider every night. People get upset if it's not the same, and because it's like keeping everything the same.
Well, it's very obvious to me that your connection with music and your value of music is the human connection part of it. What we like to talk about here is what you think about the relationship between art and music and money, and if if they go together, if they don't. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that, of course, they always go together, especially in our culture. Money goes with everything, right? But at the same time, I think it's random. I feel like the connections are random. I mean, that's been my experience in that other people would have a very different reply, I'm sure. But my own experience, my personal experience is that when we make money from our art or from our music, it seems random. Like, and then when we calculate and we really try and we're like, yeah, it doesn't work anyway, or it's unpredictable anyway. So it isn't like you're really in control. It does feel way, way more chaotic. And, but it happens like in these unpredictable ways. Like here's a specific example. Galaxie 500, the biggest payday we ever got was for 30 seconds of an instrumental track from our first record that was used for a Honda commercial. And we were paid more for that Honda commercial than all the royalties for all our record sales combined.
Wow.
Now, footnote, we were ripped off for all our record sales.
Yeah.
But that's not uncommon. You know, that's another one of these ways that it's like, yeah, good luck with that. I mean, yeah, you maybe you sold records, maybe you didn't, but whether you actually got paid for that, that's a whole other, set of circumstances. So we hadn't been paid really fairly or accurately for our record sales. But, that being said, I mean, Honda paid us and it was like, oh my God, that's crazy, because we didn't do anything to earn it. I mean, zero. The band was broken up already. It was 30 seconds literally of an instrumental track, no lyrics, no melody. It was, the song is just called instrumental, for God's sake. It has no, we didn't feel any, I'll speak for myself, I didn't feel any compunction licensing it because it wasn't like, it's like Tugboat or something, and there and like AT&T has a new phone called Tugboat, and they're gonna,
that would be horrible. I can see that happening.
Yeah, and we're like giving up, we're giving up some kind of association with our lyric. It was none of that. It was like really like 30 seconds of a throwaway track, as far as I was concerned. It was album filler, literally, because we thought we were making an EP, and then it turned out we had almost enough for an album. And we're like, we'll throw on that one that we, 30 seconds, band was broken up. Nobody solicited it. It was just like a phone call came one day. Now contrast that with like years of just like killing ourselves on the road and, getting at each other's throats personally. I mean, like all this like Sturm und Drang and drama and yeah, we earn some money sometimes and not others, but it's just not connected. We did nothing. We did absolutely nothing to earn it. So that's really, and that's not so unusual. I think if you look into bands' histories, if they're willing to tell you really honestly about where their money has come from or hasn't, more often than not, I bet you there's stories like that. It's like it fell from the sky. Yeah. Who was I reading about the other day? Oh, I know. Oh, this relates to it. I had never seen the movie Dig. Have you guys watched that?
Yeah. Brian Jonestown.
I'd never seen it because, again, it was like the 90s. It was my generation. I read the descriptions. I was like, I don't want to relive any of that.
Yeah.
So, that's not my idea of entertainment.
Yeah.
And then I'm very involved in this new musicians union that we're trying to build.
Yes.
Union of Musicians and Allied Workers. And everyone else in it is much younger by and large. And we were in a meeting and someone quoted something in Dig. And I was like, oh my God, actually I've never seen it. And they were like, what? You've never seen that? You've got, and they were like, you've got to go watch that.
Yeah.
It's hilarious.
It is hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, okay. So I got off the call and I streamed it that night, And anyway, so here's how my 90s were so crazy. I had never heard, what's the band that's not Brian Jonestown Massacre? The band that made a big hit.
Oh man.
The guy's name's Courtney Taylor. The other one. The famous one.
Yes, I can't remember them either. I never listened to them.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. That's what happens. They made a fortune.
Yeah.
They made an absolute fortune. And so they had one big hit. I mean, they had a really big hit.
Dandy Warhols.
Thank you, Dandy Warhols. Right. Yeah, I'd never listened to them first of all because of the name.
Yeah.
And then,
right.
and then in the 90s, we were just like, the hell with the whole like major label slick thing. Like, we're staying so far away from it.
Yeah.
So I'm watching this movie, and the way the movie's constructed, it sort of assumes that you know their hit song. Like, how could you have escaped it?
Right. But
I'd never heard it.
Same. And I still don't even know if I have.
Yeah. Well, so then afterwards, I looked it up on Wikipedia because I was like, so what was that hit song that they had? And I look it up, and if you look at their history, okay, so they signed the major label deal. This is in the movie. They're like, their first video cost like $400,000 or $500,000 for a goddamn video. Mm-hmm. They don't even have a record out, right?
Yeah.
So obviously so much money is being thrown at them and this, and then they have these records and they don't do as well as they need to. And then they have a hit. How do they have a hit? It was an ad. It was an ad campaign. Fell in their lap. It was for Vodafone in Europe.
That's right. That's in the movie too.
Yeah. And Vodafone bought that song to use. They licensed that hit song, and that's when it became a hit.
Wow.
So it wasn't even that it became a hit. It was that all those kids at the Reading Festival had heard the Vodafone commercial.
Yeah.
And that made their fortune and saved their career, basically.
That's wild.
Which is the same thing, because like the movie's all about like killing yourself to try and make it happen. Yeah. And in the end, what made it happen for them was Vodafone. It's like they didn't earn that. I mean, in my perspective, maybe they think they did.
The weird thing is there's always been this association that artists are really bad at making money, or they don't care about making money. And there's been a characterization of artists that, it's uncool to care about money and to care about making money. That's been historically true of all the slacker 90s bands and even like the bohemian bands of like the early 2000s. But now we're talking to people in our orbit here that they want to make a living from their work. They want to try to at least make it viable, so they can buy gear, or they can rent a car to go on tour, or they can, collaborate with another musician or pay for mastering and all these things that are, the prices continue to go up. And that's an interesting thing. I wanted to hear your thoughts about that, because in your podcast, you talked to this like punk band that is talking about labor and like and that's such a cool moment in that show where it's like, you're realizing that the struggles of that band are very much like of this present moment.
Yeah, that's the Downtown Boys was the band in that scene, and actually UMA, to get back to the union that I've been working with a lot, it's Downtown Boys are at the core of starting that union. So it's the same people.
That's awesome.
And that's exactly right. They had this really sophisticated attitude that I had not run into from my generation of bands about thinking about their labor. And they were thinking about compensation in terms of labor, way more well-read and well-versed in political thinking and leftist thinking than I think we ever were, certainly at that age. And really blew me away, that's how that whole episode happened in the podcast. But the funny thing is that I was going to say is that actually I think bands have always been really good at thinking about money, because you absolutely have to. And because even if your attitude is like, anti-material, you go to the gig and it's like, there's so much cash and there's so much counting involved and there's so much like dividing of the money, and you're constantly dealing in these cash exchanges. At least this was our era, that, it's really like drowning in dollars and cents. I mean, every single gig, you're like at least on the back of an envelope making calculations,
Yeah.
So you really can't ignore it at all. It's just that some people manage to have other people do it for them. But that can be very calculatedly a power move with regard to money. So for example, we've known artists who, I don't want to name names, but this is not an uncommon strategy, which is whenever money comes up, they're like, oh, don't talk to me about the money, talk to the manager.
Yeah.
But the manager's talking to them about the money. And it's like, it's actually like a huge money power play to be like, I don't talk about money.
Yeah.
Because of course you have to, especially if it's like your own musician or it's the opening band, or it's like someone that you actually you owe money to, or you have some kind of agreement with, and you're on the other side of, you can't shirk that responsibility and claim that it's like not being material. It's more just being irresponsible or a jerk. But it's a really classic attitude to be like, I don't touch money.
Mm.
And I think that's a star move, but it's a way to shift a lot of the issues that money brings up onto other people. And then those other people have to do all the dirty work, and then you get to claim that you never did it. But and then then again, there are many, many stories that you can find in stories about bands, about like, people being fired by fax, or people being, they had the manager call, not them, or, these people, all these kinds of bad behaviors where it's that they had other people do their dirty work. And a lot of that does often happen in the cash as well. But in terms of actual dealing with money, in my experience, it was like from day one, you had no choice, because it's like you pull up to the club and it's like, here's your money, and it's handed to one of you, and then it's like you all get back in the van. And it's like, who's paying for the pizza? I mean, it's just at the basic level of like, you're constantly dealing with it. And then money brings up all these funny exchanges. I don't know if it's still quite as cash a business as it was when we started. It used to be in 100% cash.
It is
everything.
Yeah. I mean, from our experience
at that point anyway. I mean, if we're talking streaming, I would say all of that is kind of behind the curtain, though.
Where
the artists are completely removed from that. Because if from the get-go, I think if artists were more aware of this is the percentage that you'll see from plays, maybe we would have gone about this whole streaming thing in a different way from the beginning. But it was kind of hidden and sold on the idea that more people will hear it. Isn't that good enough for you? Isn't that enough? Isn't that what you want out of your art, is just to connect to people? Isn't that your whole thing? And that's a tough mindset to change, especially with generations older than us, trying to convince them that just because people enjoy making the art doesn't mean that they should do it for free.
Totally. Yeah, that's so important. What you said also about it, if it was less mystifying, basically, if it was more upfront, I think we wouldn't be in this trouble that we're in. I totally agree. I think that what has happened with streaming specifically is that music is basically a cash business, and it's a very primitive business of like, well, performing is just so simple. It's basically like putting a hat out in glorified ways. And then record sales have always been really primitive too. It's like, you make something, you sell it for more than it costs you to make. I mean, it's not more mysterious than that. But streaming, now that's a whole other thing. It's not a business that has any kind of relationship to cash. It's a capital business that has to do with valuation and all these mysterious kinds of shell games of mysterious ways of building value without actual value. Like, for example, Spotify declares a loss on music nearly every quarter that they've been in business. I think they've had 2 quarters that they've said they were in the black on music, and otherwise they're in the red. And it's like, well, if you were a band in the red quarter after quarter after quarter, it'd be like, well, maybe this isn't working out, guys. You got to figure something out. Like, this is not working out. You got to better get another job, but you can still play the music, but you better get another job. And Spotify they do have another job. Basically, they have this where they're really building value, has nothing to do with how music builds value.
Yeah, exactly.
And how musicians see value. So yeah, and I do think that has depended on not being transparent, on being mystifying. Now, the major labels have always pulled a version of that too, or labels in general, when they're behaving badly. Which, to get back to like that movie Dig, where like the Dandy Warhol sign, it's like, okay, we're going to make you a $400,000 video before your album's even out. And that's already kind of mystifying, because it's like, well, how does that work? And then there's all this kind of like leaps of faith of like, yeah, you just keep keep like building the image, and then the money will flow after that fact, even if there's no music there that anybody actually wants yet, which makes no sense. But of course, the majors especially have always kind of preferred to work in that direction because then they have a lot more control and over what they're creating. I mean, it's like they want to create, that's like their idea of how it's going to hit. But that still is like way away from the kind of mystification that you get from these tech platforms, where it's really like they don't even explain how they do make their money. How does Spotify make their money? Mm-hmm. We don't really know.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think it's all data. I think it's all about, just like Google, but, or Facebook. But Spotify's like, oh, no, we don't sell our data. And it's like, really? Well, you're selling something. You know, it's like, where is it?
But where is it? What's the weird thing is that when I used to have conversations with my friends in college about when Spotify and and Apple Music were emerging, and we would be like, oh, there's going to be a breaking apart of the mainstream. People are going to be exposed to so much more stuff. They're going to be, able to go on their own adventures, and all this underground music will start to have a new life. And part of that is true. It does. Music reaches more people, but the mainstream is also much more consolidated than it ever was in a lot of ways. Because I think it's like there's only like 6 artists that occupy like the 99% of the streaming, and that's crazy. And then all the millions of other artists have the other 1%.
Yeah, it's so upside down. But I think you're absolutely right that you had reason for that idealism about online access to music, and I think it does exist. I mean, it is, as you say, it is true that you can use the platforms to find really remarkable stuff. But I think it's because, in a way, digital is so made for that in a lot of ways, going down a rabbit hole.
Yeah,
that these huge companies that have taken over, dominate our online access now, they really panic about that. They really don't want you doing that. It's way, way, way counter and too chaotic and too counter to their whole method of making money, which is to consolidate things and make everything more narrow choices, like a chain store, like Target. You could say, wow, you got such a huge big box here. You could put all kinds of crazy stuff in here. It's like, well, no, that's not exactly what we're going to use this for. We're going to like make sure you buy what we've got the best margins on so that we make the best profit here. And we'll make sure also that you don't have to go to any other store. So we'll have enough other stuff that you can come in here and then leave with what you need, like a supermarket. You can find almost anything in a supermarket sometimes, but the whole profit margins in like the cornflakes. If you ever read those articles about, I think it's Michael Pollan's book. Does he make that point? Anyway, it's about how like the fresh produce on the outside edge of the supermarket has the smallest profit margins, or even sometimes it's all a loss leader for the market. And it's the aisles in the middle with like the boxes of stuff that's all processed food. That's where their margins are so huge.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so it's kind of like that with online access and Spotify and Apple, where it really is big enough because it's digital. There's no limit to what can be on there, that it could be all, you can go on there and just spend your time listening to really outside stuff. But they don't want you to. And so then now they've like walled it off so that it's harder and harder and harder to find your way to the other, to the strangers, to the stuff that they're not trying to get you to listen to. Do you guys know this whole distinction? Because it relates to how we're paid differently for different streams as well, which is interactive versus non-interactive streaming. Or it's also referred to as passive and active listening.
No.
So satellite radio, or radio in general, is passive or non-interactive. And this is now talking in terms of copyright law in the US, meaning you just tune in, right? And you get whatever is on the channel. So we have royalties and regulations that pertain to passive listening or non-interactive listening. The streaming platforms came along and said, we are outside that system, we're not going to pay like radio. We're not going to have to be regulated for content like radio, or because we're interactive. We're active listening. And what they mean by that is that the listener goes on and chooses what they want to hear. And they very, very much have emphasized that from the beginning, because it gave them such a free hand from existing rules and regulations. The labels were all for it, because it meant that they had to negotiate individually with the labels for copyright permission. Because if it's passive listening, it falls under what's called a compulsory license, where you must allow the radio station to play your music. You can't say, I don't want my music on the radio, right? But the radio also cannot say, well, we're going to decide what to pay you for it. They must pay the same to everybody. And that's so it's compulsory license that has a statutory royalty rate. So the labels were like, okay, we support this idea that the streaming is neither of these, because we want to negotiate a new deal with the platforms. And the labels cut themselves a deal and made money from it like they never had from any other platform. They took ownership, for one thing, from Spotify, and they made a fortune. So they did it by insisting that it's active listening, that's interactive and active listening. Now, here's the thing. What did the platforms do? They have moved from day one away from that for the consumer, because it leaves way too much choice to the consumer. So when you were in college and hearing about this and feeling idealistic about it, you were thinking about it as an interactive, active listener.
Yeah.
And that is exactly how they were set up. It's how they sold themselves to the industry. And it's even still how they're sold to the law. I mean, that's how they exist as a copyright entity or use of copyright. But the truth is, they have pushed it into the other side as fast as they can. So playlists are, of course, passive, right? They're non-interactive. When you log on and it just starts giving you stuff, it's non-interactive. Spotify has the thing which I know about because I've written a little bit about it, so I investigated, where if you do use it interactively, you choose what to hear. At the end of that, it starts playing you stuff without you choosing.
Yes.
So it immediately switches you from interactive to non-interactive, from active to passive. And yet, they still exist, they insist, as an interactive platform. See, satellite radio has a whole different royalty structure and governmental control because it's passive and non-interactive. So that's one case that needs to be made about fixing streaming, is to make it clear that it's not, or as it's practiced, it's not interactive. See, Bandcamp is. I mean, you go on Bandcamp, you're going to have to make a move. You got to click.
Yeah.
Bandcamp just doesn't just play you something.
Yeah.
And then when it stops, you've got to now click again. And if you look at how people talk about Bandcamp, sometimes they complain because they're like, it's hard to use, or, I don't know what to listen to.
Yeah.
Those are the very complaints that Spotify and Apple Music listened to from their consumers and thought, we got to make sure they never say this. Just like you don't want people walking in the supermarket and be like, oh my God, it's so big, I don't know what to buy. It's like, well, put something on the end cap with a big sign and it's on sale, and they'll buy that.
Right.
Or put it down low for the kid and they'll grab that.
Right.
All those kinds of tricks. And that's what they've done with the platform. But we should not forget that the reality is that it should be interactive. Digital is interactive. I mean, I think if you just return the internet to what we all use it in a way, part of our day this way, and it could be way more, is to use it as an interactive tool. It's an incredible, powerful tool.
Yes.
And we just have to really protect ourselves, I think, against this passivity that's just like pushed on us by these corporations.
Yeah.
Corporations have always done that to consumers, right?
Yeah.
But digital like ramps it up. Like it's just like way, way, way more powerful, I think, in our use than we ever had before. So it's going to take more kind of pushing back.
Well, I mean, we've watched the sunset behind you here.
Yeah. I should maybe turn on the light.
No.
Well, beautiful. We're going to have a huge snowstorm tomorrow.
Oh, really?
Oh,
yeah.
Nice. You got the Barry Lyndon lighting.
Oh my God, I'm so glad you know Barry Lyndon. Barry Lyndon, I saw it first run in the theater. It had an intermission.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I don't know.
I went with my parents, and I grew up in New York City, and my parents loved film, and they would take me to see movies like that, and it had an intermission. We like went out in the hall and
Yeah, that's awesome.
went back in.
Yeah.
Act 2.
Got to sell those concessions.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. There were some questions. We were talking earlier, and I think you had tweeted too about, and in your podcast you had mentioned the connection between selling music, which is an intangible thing. Really, you're selling the technology used to play the music, which is a tangible. And that is true with the piano auto player.
Yeah.
And record players were initially just pieces of furniture, and the records were made as accessories to those pieces of furniture. And even now, and I hate to give him too much airtime, but Kanye has come out with this stem player. And these are all kind of interesting thoughts about the intangible. Does that mean it, because we don't know how to measure the value, does that mean it doesn't really have any? And for young artists, is it, if they're deciding if they're going to devote their life to it at this point, would you recommend it? Would you recommend that they lean further into trying to find ways of income through it, or to kind of stick it out as...
Yeah, I'm so glad. I really love the way you framed this, because that does get to the heart of something that's so important to me, but is hard to really discuss and get people to listen to in some ways, which is, I really do sincerely believe that music is free, which is part of the context of when I raised that about the technology. Because yes, we pay for the way that we package it and exchange it. But when recording first came around, nobody thought that music had a value in the sense of like a monetary value. Because how could it? It's like it's in the air. It's quite literally in the air. And there's these amazing, if you go back and read like the copyright decisions that were made in the courts at the time, the judges actually said, no, you can't charge for this. It's in the air. And it's like, you don't usually find such metaphysical statements in legal history, but that's like one of those moments where it's like, wow, this judge was far out. But probably the judge was probably just old fashioned and was like, no, what are you talking about? It's like music, you can charge for the sheet music, right? That's an object that has a copyright on it, like any other printed material, and then it has a value that you can sell and exchange in the marketplace. But performing that music, in your parlor, how can you say that's something you own? And to me, I think that's just a truth that we can't get around. Like, the whole 20th century history of recorded music has worked hard to get away from that. But then digital came along and sort of reanimated that whole question, because then it took our recordings, which had only been impossible to exchange on these physical things, and put them back in the air, online. So it's like, well, you got to deal with this all over again. So when Napster happened, it was like, wow, look, our recordings are free. And then everybody's been kind of like trying to deal with that ever since. But to me, the simplest way to deal with it is to just accept it and say, yeah, of course it's free. It was free to begin with, and it's like, don't fight that. And the fighting it has taken all these twisted turns that make things so hard. And ultimately, I think make it harder than ever to find our means of exchange and our true ways of charging fairly and having value and making a living, because it's all built on mystification, to get back to the other part of our conversation, where you have to kind of mystify digital to insist that it's not free. So, my feeling, like with Spotify, as much as I resent what they do, my feeling is like, if they have built this platform and people love it, great, charge for it. But don't pretend that what you're charging for is the music, right? Because they don't own my music. They don't have the right, really, to sell use of my music. They're taking advantage of the fact that digital is actually free. And then they're creating their own value in between. But if they would just be less mystifying about it, or if all of us could kind of like let that go and say, okay, the music's free. You want to pay Spotify for their software? Do it. But you're not paying the musician. Let's just be totally clear about this. You're actually pirating, as some people would consider it, the music, because the music is being exchanged without any money. Now, I'm not that against piracy, in that, again, digital piracy, in my experience, didn't really hurt musicians that I know.
The
I'm
Grateful
sure it
Dead
hurt.
made a whole career off of it.
Yeah,
allowing.
exactly. Yeah, allowing it, precisely. I'm sure it hurt pop stars, and major labels hated it because, it was like, it's like duplicating the products in Target or in the supermarket. So they needed that like throttle hold on the pop market, and they felt it was threatened by it. But for the rest of us, it really never, I don't think, damaged our way to make a living. But Spotify does. And I think it's because it's more mystifying even than piracy. Piracy is very flat out. It's like, here's the music, you didn't pay for it. If Spotify would just admit that that's what they're doing, then I think we'd kind of be able to find our way around it and say, like, well, how can we pay each other for stuff? Technology is one way. So Kanye, he's selling hardware because people will pay for hardware. Apple, of course, made all their money not selling tracks on iTunes, but selling iPods and then iPhones. So it was the same thing. I mean, they made it through the hardware.
Yeah.
Spotify, again, they don't have anything to sell. I mean, they just went to market, I think, this week with this thing to put in your car, which looks so goofy. It just looks basically like when you put your phone on your dashboard, except it's got, I don't know, a suction cup on it or something. It's like really, that's the best you can do with all that R&D, like you came up with a suction cup. But it's like an attempt to like, well, we better sell people something,
Yeah.
And that's not bad. I don't think it's bad when people admit they've got to be looking at what you can exchange. I mean, vinyl, cassettes. I mean, it's like it's acknowledging that there is an exchange going on and there's value for both sides in it. Let's make it work. But digital, I just don't know if it's ever going to work in that way because it ultimately is free. And I don't think we should fight against that. But when I say this to most people in the industry, they really, really want me to shut up. Because it's just like the worst thing you can say.
There's just I think it's hard to figure out what the cure is for this.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we're in this culture now where, or a situation where the cost of living is rising all the time. Right. So if an artist wants to exist, even just in the most basic form, there's a certain amount of money that they have to make. And what advice would you give to an artist who wants their art to remain pure? They don't want to sell their souls. They don't want to target what they're creating for something beyond just their own self-expression and human connection. How would you recommend that they go about making a living also?
Yeah, it's such a deep question. I mean, one thing I would say is that I've seen people, in quotes, sell their soul for very little. as well as very much, right? Like I've seen that happen at every level. So I don't think it's a question of necessarily quantity. I mean, I think you can really, and everybody knows that, like, you might have had a friend on the playground who did you dirt, and it wasn't actually based on like a big contract. It might have been like a candy bar or a friendship that you double-cross somebody on. And so people behave badly at every possible level of options. And then I've also seen people really manage to, work the system and in my opinion, stay really true to their sense of self and sense of friendships and loyalty and kind of dignity and honor, and manage to like go the whole route. So I think that is possible too. So I would say, first of all, separate those things, because I think you can be really badly behaved at any point and really well behaved at any point too. It may mean sacrifices to behave better, but that's we do those all the time. Then the other thing about like, well, how do you go about it? I mean, one thing I would say, and this is partly why I'm organizing with UMA, is it really is political. If we're going to say, if you follow my logic that, okay, digital really is free, then it's kind of like, well, so what do we fight for? And it's like, well, one way you could look at it is, well, we should fight for universal healthcare, so that we're not trying to earn from our streams enough to pay our health insurance. Yes. And it's like, well, what else could happen? Well, you could have basic income. Like some countries do that, and we have a very rich country we live in. I mean, there are a whole lot of things that could happen to make life better for all of us.
Yes.
Whether we're making music or not, that would make a huge difference. You know, it's like free childcare. I mean, there's just like so many things that we lack in this country in terms of a social guarantees or net or safety net, and musicians really are feeling the lack of them extremely right now, because we've been out of work from COVID and streaming has gutted our non-performing work. So, you know, we're in a pretty bad way. But if you look around, it's like we're not alone. You know, it's like people are in a bad way all over the place in all kinds of walks of life. And so to me, you know, one way to think about it might just be common cause with other walks of life. Like we are all in a pretty bad situation. And if we solve some of those problems, it would actually make living as an artist a lot easier. You know, one way that Naomi and I managed when we were young was we live in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And at the time there was rent control here. And we had a rent control apartment. That was the first apartment we rented out of college. And our rent was so cheap that we could live as musicians. Now, rent control was then abolished here in Cambridge, tragically to me, in the early 90s. 94, I think it was eliminated. And all the rents went skyrocketing. And of course, all the artists like had to leave town. Yeah. Basically, you know?
Yep. It's happening here in Nashville too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, rent is like, you know, what do you spend your money on? I mean, whether you're an artist or not, what are your biggest expenses? I mean, it's like rent, healthcare, you know, these are like the things that everybody has to face. So if we could reduce the pressures from those, you do a huge amount to make it more possible to live as an artist. Yeah. And then I think, you know, you find ways. I mean, people are inventive and creative and will constantly find ways to make it work. But it's very hard to make it work when rent requires like not just a full-time job, but like a full-time high-paying job or like 3 poorly paying jobs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because then it's just no hope. There's just no hope.
Right.
So I'd say, you know, organize, think locally, think big, think across parts of society, and work together. And I think that will probably do more even than like fighting Spotify. I mean, as much as I do spend a lot of energy fighting Spotify.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that's a beautiful place to wrap up here because that's something that we talk about all the time, and that's you know, you just hit the nail on the head for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that's always been the secret to a lot of great scenes that have happened in the arts. If you kind of poke at their edges, you find out, oh, rent was really cheap right there. Then you know,
yeah, for sure.
And then the scenes disappear. You know, I mean, a lot of it does depend on really just physical things like that.
Yeah,
and you know, but think creatively that way. I mean, so much progress can be made, I think, in our country, looking forward, as soon as we get rid of some of these older white guys who are in power. And they're going to disappear because they're all going to die. So, you know, I mean, I keep thinking it's like, you know, the good healthcare that they get is like really prolonging our misery by so many years, you know, because these people would have, they all lived so badly. They all would have died much younger. Back in the day, you know, they all would have had dropped dead from heart attacks. Yeah. Because they're all like, you know, steak eating, you know what I mean? I mean, they're just so unhealthy. And God, they've got these statins driving down their cholesterol, and then they just keep starting wars.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're on the eve of one right now, it seems.
Yeah, exactly. But they will eventually disappear. And then I do have tremendous faith in younger people right now. And I feel like we are looking ahead to very positive possibilities.
Yeah, we share
but
that.
I would aim them in that direction.
If someone wanted to learn more about the union that you've been talking about, where should they go for more information on that?
Yes, the website is unionofmusicians.org. Easy to remember, unionofmusicians.org. And the acronym we use is UMAW, or some people say UMA. And it's Union of Musicians and Allied Workers. And the website has a ton of stuff, and we have new member meetings fairly regularly. And there are loads of people in there working on many, many issues. I work on the streaming stuff, which if you've looked at my writing or social media, you know loud and clear. but other people are working on all kinds of other things. We have a police abolition committee,
Yeah.
who've been like getting donations of instruments and sending them into the prisons. And
Wow. That's awesome.
we have people working on venue stuff. We have people working on labels. We have people working on healthcare. We've like a lot of, and it's open, it's democratic. So something that's not happening, it's wide open for people to step in and be like, let's do this. And as I say, it's way younger than me. I'm an old guy there. So I really benefit from it, but you should give it a look.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's been
My
an
pleasure.
honor.
Really, really. Oh, it's such a really delight to talk to both of you. And I really look forward to when we can come back I love Nashville personally. And I mean, the Broadway honky tonk thing is not my scene, as you can imagine, but I love the town, and I
can't wait to see you. I haven't seen you guys ever. So I would
we have
that.
not had the chance to come down in a while. I've been there for like a speaking gig at, what's the college that's in just outside town? There's a big music program. Yeah, in Murfreesboro.
Oh,
yeah,
MTSU.
Murfreesboro.
Yeah.
Murfreesboro. Yeah. I was there, and anyway, but yeah, I miss it. I really want to come down.
Well, we can't wait to have you.
Yes.
Well, I'll be there. We'll be there sometime.
Let us know.
Great to meet you both.
Great to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, take care.
Thanks for listening to Devalued. For more information about our podcast, please visit devalued.show.